All right, good morning and welcome to day 5, the final session of the AP's first ever Press Freedom Week. My name is Meg Kennard and I'm a national politics reporter at the Associated Press. To everyone who has been with us all week, thank you. Readers and donors like you help make this work possible, and we are so grateful. And if you're joining us for the first time today, welcome. This week, AP has hosted 5 days of conversations about press freedom, independent journalism, and what it takes to report the facts. Today, we close out with a conversation about covering American politics and the White House. For 180 years, the Associated Press has set the standard for political reporting: independent, nonpartisan, and accurate. Today, we'll talk about how that work has changed, what it takes to stay grounded across administrations, and why developing deep expertise on a beat still matters in a world of constant breaking news. I am joined today by 3 of AP's most experienced Washington journalists: Zeke Miller, AP Deputy Washington Bureau Chief; Darlene Superville, a veteran White House reporter for AP; and John Elswick, an AP photo editor who has spent years documenting Washington. One last ask to close out the week. AP is a not-for-profit news organization with no corporate owner, no shareholders, and no paywall. If this week has shown you something about the value of independent journalism, please consider making a gift at apnews.com/donate or by scanning the QR code on the screen. Again, thank you for being here, and let's get started. So, with this esteemed panel of journalists with so much experience covering Washington and politics for AP, I want to start by kind of peeling back the curtain of what it means to be in the press pool. Well, first off, what is a press pool? What does it look like to be part of it? And what is that experience like? Zeke, do you want to get us going by talking about press pools?
Sure. The basic idea of a press pool is there are a lot of journalists in the world, there are a lot of journalists in Washington, and there's one president, there's one Oval Office, there's one Air Force One, uh, you know, and even in Congress, there's small venues, and basically a press pool is a way for journalists to organize themselves to cover major events and events of significance and individuals of significance uh, with when they all can't be there physically for a variety of reasons, but a lot of it's space, cost, time, and so that's why journalists set up press pools. In fact, the first one was at the White House was more than almost 150 years ago when an ailing president was sick. An Associated Press journalist was basically stationed outside of the president's sick room, listening for his breathing. That's an example of what a press pool does, so that not every journalist in Washington was there. One person was there and reporting back for everybody.
What is it kind of, Darlene, maybe you can go on with this one. What does it mean to really have this kind of proximity to power? I mean, there's a lot of responsibility in being that one reporter who's listening for the president's breathing, or in the circumstance these days, really just being part of a close hold group of reporters. So what does that responsibility mean to you, and why is having that sort of role these days really important for accountability in covering government and politics?
Yeah, absolutely. It's important because it's important to have an independent press reporting on the activities of the President of the United States. If we didn't have that in the United States, which is a democracy, we would only be getting what the President and what the White House, the kind of information that they want us to have. All the positive news, all the good things that they think they're doing. We're seeing some of that in the current environment, but we see it with all presidents. They're never happy with their independent press coverage because we hold them to account. We press for them to justify decisions they're making, policies they're implementing, Um, Independent reporters will dig under the surface and report on conflicts of interest or issues that are not uh, as positive as they're being presented to us. So it's very important to have independent reporters and a press pool following the President of the United States, not only around the country when they travel or around the world, but in the White House itself, which is where we are too.
John, maybe you can speak to that sort of accountability and responsibility from a visuals perspective. When you're in the field, when AP's photographers are in the field, how is this responsibility reflected when it comes to a visual environment?
Well, for the photographers, we travel and we need to be there. We need to see the president to show what he's doing. That's when Zeke talked about the press pool. We always have an AP photographer travel on Air Force One. We get into the Oval Office. We get into those small scenes and situations. And it's part of our job to document what we are seeing. And the photographer, with that comes great responsibility. It's quite an honor to be able to do that.
Darlene, maybe I can come to you for this one, although I would like to hear from everybody. Can you give us an example of a story or a moment where you had unique access to or unique perspective on because you were with the Associated Press?
Sure. One that comes to mind was about 3 years ago. It was during the Biden administration, and First Lady Jill Biden was taking a trip to Africa. She was going to Namibia and Kenya to do some goodwill stuff over there. Her press office wanted the AP on the trip. One of the things that I've done at the White House in all the years that I've been on the beat is cover the First Ladies and the East Wing. And so I had been covering Jill Biden, and they wanted the AP to come on the trip. Um, I can't remember why, but the decision was made that maybe we sit this particular trip out. The First Lady's office was a little disappointed that AP would not be on her trip to Africa, and so they offered us an interview with her. So that was one of the ways that we were able to go. It also, I think, showed the just the importance of the AP and the respect that her office and the Biden White House had for us. The trip happened around a period of time when there was a lot of um, wondering whether Joe Biden, the president, would run for reelection. And so in the interview, that was one of the things that we were going to try to press her on. So the interview took place when she was in Kenya. It was a one-on-one with her. And during the interview, I finally got her, after several rounds of questioning, got her to basically confirm that Joe Biden was going to be running for reelection. And of course, that was the first time that anyone close to him had actually like stepped up to the line and said, yeah, basically he's going to do it. And the story went like rocket fire around the world, the political establishment in DC, and all the rest. And so I think that's a good example of AP and our proximity and the kind of news that we can deliver.
Yeah, throughout the lead up to that campaign cycle, I remember citing your story multiple times when I was doing my own reporting about that Biden campaign. So I'm glad you were there. Zeke, for you, what's something that stands out?
One of the great things that comes with being a White House reporter is that, you have the privilege of traveling the world with the President of the United States, and you watch these countries, roll out the red carpet for the American leader, and it's, the American people's representative. It's the American people are being honored by extension, and but there's one of those interactions that stands out to me, which is when President Trump in his first term met with Kim Jong-un of North Korea in Singapore for their first time meeting these, two leaders of two countries that have, officially still been at war. There's an armistice. There's never a permanent peace deal at the end of the Korean War, and just sort of the pinch me moment, which is a feeling that you experience every day as a White House reporter. I mean, if you stop feeling that pinch me moment, it's probably time to leave the beat. But that was one of those moments where I just cannot believe how we got here, and that I am in this room watching this play out, and this meeting. And it was a massive global story storyline, and there are thousands of reporters who flew in from all corners of the earth to Singapore to watch this play out. And this is it was just kind of a surreal experience to cover and produce some really great journalism. And it was a really interesting, compelling stories we were able to tell. But it was probably the ultimate pinch me moment I've had on this job.
Absolutely. John, what about you?
I think a more recent example would be the inauguration for President Trump's second term. Obviously, the inauguration is on the west front of the Capitol. I think we were scheduled to have 10 photo positions, multitude of remotes, and then the weather changed that all, and we went inside. So we went from 10 photographers to having one photographer inside, Julia Nickinson, and she was in one of the coveted spots inside because it's really limited access. Then, in addition, because of AP's reach, we were selected to do the remote that is basically at the president's and the vice president's feet as they are sworn in. We would do that outside, but there's a lot of kind of like, okay, we're getting this right now. We're hooked up to the Ethernet, and we're moving the photos just almost in real time.
Definitely a moment of pivot for everybody who was covering that inauguration, but definitely, absolutely, even more so maybe from that visual perspective. So thank you for sharing that. Zeke, I want to start with you, but others, please feel free to chime in. What's a moment of covering U.S. politics? And that obviously includes the White House, but is more than that too. What's a moment from your politics coverage that really stands out?
There've been so many of those moments that, you talk to any reporter, particularly someone covering politics, we just have stories for everything. That's what we trade in, and what we like to tell our readers too is to give all of you our stories. One that immediately comes to mind was it's often, they sort of end up being these life-defining moments. And sort of, where were you when X, Y, or Z happened? It was the day that President Biden dropped out of that of seeking reelection that July Sunday at 1:11 p.m. or so, and in 2024, and it's sort of been expected, but like anything, like any surprise, we didn't quite know exactly when it was going to happen, and we're staying near our phones, and came out giving my toddler's son lunch, and then watching, I sprang into action, uh, got our news alert out, and then watching the rest of the AP come together to tell this incredible story with huge ramifications for that presidential race, for the Democratic primary, for the general election that fall. I mean, within 72 hours, the AP, 48 hours, sorry, the AP's delegate counting operation was stood up, and there really wasn't a competitive Democratic primary before, to making sure to be able to declare that Kamala Harris, the vice president, had the nomination in hand. That watching that get stood up, watching our reporters out with Donald Trump tell his side of the story, and then ultimately the rest of that general. But that's sort of one of those moments where, singular moments in covering politics that, everything changed in an instant, and really, I think, showcased just how nimble AP reporters can be.
And stands out too, given the time frame of many of us had just come home from the Republican National Convention, and we're
Yes.
kind of coming off of a very busy time and had just a couple hours, and then all of a sudden it was a full-on sprint. So I think that one's, I would agree with you that that's one of those moments that stands out for me too. Darlene, John, any political coverage moments that are pinnacle for you?
Well, I'll just piggyback off of Zeke's moment because I was on the opposite end of that. So Joe Biden at the time, he had come down with a second case of COVID, and he'd went to his beach house in Rehoboth, Delaware, to spend some time there to recover and also to think about this big decision that he had to make. And this goes back to the earlier question about the press pool. I was in the Biden press pool, so I was holed up in a hotel in Rehoboth Beach, Delaware, just kind of, waiting there for Biden to do something or whatever. And I think it was a Sunday, and out on social media on X comes this letter from Joe Biden where he is sort of outlining his reasons for dropping out. So that sort of goes back to the early question about being in the press pool. And like, I now remember where I was when Joe Biden made this big decision. But the moment that sticks out mostly for me is more of a personal one. It goes back to the Obama administration. 2010, he had had a news conference. I was fortunate enough to be sent out to represent the AP that day. President Obama came out, did his opening statement, 10 or so minutes, and then he started to take questions as they will do. And he said he'll take a question from Darlene Supperville of AP. Now, you all know my name is pronounced Superville. Apparently, there was a collective groan by my colleagues back in the office watching. Before the news conference, when I found out that I would be going out there to represent AP, I had told both of my parents, this is going to be on national TV, watch, et cetera, et cetera. So after the news conference later that night, I'm on the phone, kind of recounting everything with my mom. And then my dad gets on the phone, and my dad was from the Caribbean. He was a very proud man. And he obviously did not like that his name was mispronounced. And he said to me, "Couldn't you correct him?" And I had to tell my dad, no, I could not correct the President of the United States on national television. So
Oh,
that's my moment.
that's definitely a good one. And we have proud parents, but I understand where you're coming from on that one as somebody with a last name that sometimes is mispronounced as well. Um, John, what about you? What's a political moment?
I'll kind of take a little cue from Zeke. I think AP in the breaking news comes together like no other organization there is. I think about the assassination attempt in Butler. I happened to be working that day. I was editing Evan Vucci, who was traveling with Trump. And when the shots fired, I was, of course, watching the video. There's a lot of planning that goes into these to make sure we get the images out. Transmission at cell signals, the way we get our images out is always a little bit more complicated these days. So being able to get these images out, coming together as quickly as we did. I think the photos streamed into my computer so quickly that I was able to move the photos before any news alert went out. And that's the way that there was that everybody was able to see there was blood on the president, that, oh, this is something dramatic and happened.
Obviously, a day all of us who have covered news pretty much in any facet remember. But John, your answer there is a perfect segue into the next question I wanted to ask, and that's how has your format changed in the last 12 to 20 years? I remember in talking with Evan and others about Butler and the coverage that day and the technology that allowed those photos to move so quickly that we use in other places as well. So, what can you say about changes when it comes to visuals during the last decade plus?
Sure. Well, I'll go 3 decades back because when I started with AP, we were still shooting film in cameras. I remember that we would do an event at the White House, be it the Oval Office, East Room, and we needed to get those pictures out, and so we would have either a motorcycle messenger or a bicycle messenger waiting on the other side of the fence at the White House. And the photographer, after the event, would dash out of the White House, literally throw the film over the fence to the motorcycle messenger or the bike messenger to speed it on to our office to process the film and move it. And even then, it was still going to be probably another 30 minutes before those images would get out. Now contrast that today, where the photographers seldom open a laptop. They're either have an Ethernet cable right to their camera, Wi-Fi, Mi-Fi, whatever way they can get those photos out, and we're moving those photos within seconds. The last address that President did to the nation, we were the single photographer in the room, and the photos moved so quickly to me, and then I was able to get them to customers before the video feed of the president actually walked out. There's usually a small delay in the satellite signal. So it's moves at the speed because we're obviously doing blogs. We're for our own reporting, we want those images, but also to our customers. The customers are our customers and subscribers are writing the same things. We need to provide those images in real time virtually.
That value of visuals, absolutely. I know is something as a primarily text reporter, something that we're always relying on to try to tell our stories even more strongly with a compelling visual. So the fact that it can happen so quickly is a benefit, not just to customers and subscribers, but to your fellow AP journalists who are relying on them. Darlene and Zeke, you've been primarily in text. What can you say about the text perspective of reporting and covering politics in the White House and how that's changed during your time doing it?
Uh, there is now more of an emphasis on like visual. Um, we are now doing a lot more talking to the camera, doing things that are called being there moments where we say, you know, I was just in the room with President Trump and he did this, or I'm here at this scene and this is what happened, kind of thing, which is not something that I did when I first got into journalism quite some time ago. um, so it's, you know, that's taken a kind of a new mindset and forced some of us to think a little bit differently about how we present news. As you say, now it's not just about the written word. People also want to see, and they want to see the journalists who are bringing them the news. And I think that they take us more seriously when they can see that we are there, is what I'm trying to say.
That's a really good point. And then that trust, it's so much easier now to sort of build trust with readers directly as a reporter because you can see them and interact with them on social media. But one specific text format shift, really in my time at AP, when I started AP, we were still talking about the folks on here from AP will laugh. AMs and PMs. It's sort of this very technical wire shorthand for morning papers, newspapers, and evening papers. And when I started at AP, evening papers had long been essentially extinct. But we don't talk that way anymore. The story goes out, the news goes out when it's ready, when it's vetted, when it's verified, and as close to that moment as we possibly can. The same with our analyses and longer form enterprise. It's not time to it's essentially an artificial printing press deadline for dead trees. That's not how we think about reaching our audiences anymore. It's much faster all the way through, even for a wire service, which is, for 170 years has prided itself with speed. The speed in which we are trying to deliver the news to all of you, accurately, consistently, is the pace of that has changed.
Absolutely. And one thing that I would add to that is one of the things that we've been doing more so in the past couple of years than ever is the concept of live blogging, which kind of has the capability to bring all formats into one place. We're often following along with breaking live events as they're happening with visuals, with video, with all these kinds of elements that you all are talking about. And that helps enrich the AP report and bring all of that information as quickly as possible in a vetted and approved circumstance, but still getting the information directly to the people who are looking for it and looking for updates. So I think that is definitely something that's changed for me for sure, but brings in all of these different formats. This might kind of go along with what Darlene was saying, but What's an unexpected skill that you've needed to develop? You're right, Darlene, that we are doing those being there video dispatches, so to speak, from campaign trail or White House or other big events. But in addition to that, is there another kind of skill set that you've come across that you didn't know you were going to be developing, but all of a sudden here you are?
Yes. I have learned since coming to Washington. So when I joined the AP, I first started in New Jersey, and I was there for a number of years before making the transfer to Washington and covering politics and the White House. And I would say one thing that I've developed that I didn't think I would ever develop is the art of small talk. In Washington, you go to a lot of events where people are milling around and receptions and things like that. And you just have to learn to, not sort of hug the wall, but how to talk to people. So I would say the art of small talk is something I've learned, as a skill that I've learned to develop.
John or Zeke, anything stand out for either of you?
Sure. I think surprisingly, it has to do with AI or not AI as far as the case of AP photos goes. Uh, AP is developing the technology with our camera partner Sony, which our photographers use, to be able to digitally sign the image the moment that photographer creates the image, pushes the shutter, so to speak, and then that digital provenance can carry on. There's nothing more important than to make sure that AP's photo content is trusted and can be empirically proved that it's trusted. There's been no manipulation. There's been nothing that would call into question what we're doing on an everyday basis. So just learning how to deploy that, and making sure that we remain the most trusted source for the news.
And on a lighter note, I'll go, which is sort of bring this back to the press pool conversation from earlier. I have developed over the years and the ability to type on my laptop while standing, with balancing it on one of my thighs, and an innate sense of how much charge my devices have left and how long that will get me through the day. Because one of the things that is true when you're in the press pool at the White House or with the campaign is, as it is a privilege, but you are along for the ride. You don't know exactly where you're going to be next, where when the next bathroom stop is, and more importantly, when the next power plug will come. Knowing exactly how much charge you have and how long you think that will get you, and then also being able to get the news out from just about any context.
Absolutely. And I'll add to that another refined skill of being able to type on your laptop in a motorcade, which could be
Yes.
going any speed that they feel like going. So,
And over bumps.
right. Or in a helicopter or any other sort of vehicle. So, thank you all for all of those thoughts. Um, Zeke and Darlene, I'm most interested in hearing from you on this, but John, feel free to chime in as well. How do you develop sources? And along with that, how do you kind of make inroads in areas where all of your colleagues at other outlets are aiming to do the same? So how do you avoid, really reporting all the same? So it's kind of a bifurcated question. How do you develop those sources that are going to keep AP ahead, and then develop from that distinctive reporting that's different from everything else that's going to be out there?
I can go first, Darlene, but at the core of a reporter-source relationship is trust. It's trust that in the event that they're providing us with information that has to be that their identity has to be shielded for for a safety reason or for their job security or the like, and something they shouldn't be telling us. It's the trust that we won't reveal it. Even for an official source where they're going to go on the record and tell us something. The reason they may go to AP first or something is the trust that AP is going to report on it responsibly with the appropriate context, and it's not going to be sort of a gotcha moment. Over time, it is being honest and trustworthy with the people we cover, such that even if today the story that we are writing portrays them or their boss in an unflattering light based on the actions that they took, that we treated them fairly and responsibly, such that, the next time around when they're working for somebody else or they have news of their own that they want to share, they're going to come and talk to the AP. And so developing that trust over time, it's not a one-off. Sourcing is not a, in the moment event. You can develop a source, in one day for one story when you absolutely have to, but it's never going to be as fulfilling and pay off the way that longer term sources will. And at the core of really the bedrock of that, is trust and being honest with them, being honest with our readers about how we got those sources and how we verify the information that they provide would be the other piece of that as well.
And I like to think that the unbiased journalism that we do, Zeke and I and other AP reporters, as AP reporters, goes a long way towards building some of that trust with our sources. One of the other things that I try to do when I am trying to, develop a source is just to be human. If I'm meeting a source for the first time, I'm not pumping them for information that first time, right? It'll be more of a get to know you. We kind of feel each other out a little bit. And then second, third, a meeting down the line, it may be, hey, what can you tell me about this? Or do you have any information on X? I also try to treat people as humans and not just a font of information or scoops. If I know they've been on vacation, I'll ask how the trip was. If they have children, I'll ask about their children. Every parent loves to talk about their children and show pictures. And I think it helps to show a little bit of interest in your source as a person, as a human being, as a parent, whatever they are outside of the official role that you need them for. I think that helps with the relationships too.
It seems like a very logical answer, but I think one that often gets missed in what can be a very chaotic and fast-paced news environment where we as reporters are often reaching out to people that we've never talked to before in the spur of the moment and pumping them for what could be some very earth-shattering information, but having the option and the time, taking the time to get to know them as people really is just, it's a human thing to do, but also can really help us both do good work together. So thank you both for sharing on that front. John, I think this is a question best suited for you, although since all of us do some version of a little bit of visual journalism, Zeke and Darlene, feel free to add. But John, how do you find yourself in the right place at the right time for photos and video? A lot of things can clearly go into moments that we don't necessarily have the option to plan out fully, but how does that work from a visuals perspective to get those powerful images?
Sure. I think I could go back a little bit to your last question
Sure.
about source development, because for photos, we do want to talk to people, talk to uh, the people in the press office, getting information. Our two favorite words that in the photo department that we live on are OTR, off the record, or FFPO, for planning purposes only. And that involves a trust that when they share information with us, it's for our planning, because the planning is going to pay off for the photographer who is actually with the subject later. Where are they going to walk? How are they going to walk? Are there other steps uh, that they'll take? What's the throw? Meaning, how away are you? Are you on a press riser 100 feet away, or are you in the buffer right next to the stage where only a few people will be? What's the light look like? So I think that it goes a long way to making our coverage distinctive, because we do that planning. We talk to the photographers. I talk to the photographers every day before they go into the Oval Office, into event, talk about what kind of photos that we think we're going to come out of. We talk about the stories of the day. Will the president comment on this or that, on a specific subject? How are we going to illustrate that? How long we think we're going to be in the Oval Office? Do we have to stay in kind of that one spot in front of the Resolute desk? Or will we be able to move around just a little bit to get a different visual viewpoint from the day?
And John, I remember during the 2024 campaign when I was crisscrossing the country covering different candidates, primarily Donald Trump's campaign, but I would often be talking to you about what's the schedule like, what's coming up, because you had those deep relationships and were able to at least share internally with us
Sure.
a bit of information about what we could expect and where we were going to be headed. So that is incredibly valuable internally and externally. Zeke and Darlene, is there anything that you'd like to add just kind of about positioning, I guess? And a lot of that goes to sourcing, but ensuring that you, on behalf of AP, are putting yourself in the right spot at the right time with the right source to be able to get that information that keeps our report ahead.
One thing I would say, and this goes back to being in the press pool, so it's the small group of 13 or so journalists at the White House who go with the president. And if he's in the Oval Office or maybe the Roosevelt Room, um, everyone is kind of clamoring to be right in front so that you can maybe make eye contact with the president so that he can call on you to ask your question, or you want to be there where you can raise his hand or that sort of thing. So we do in the pool, we do have to think about positioning and trying to get into the room before other reporters so that I can get that perfect spot. Because most of what I do now, I'm at the White House, I don't have an opportunity to go out to the scene of fires or other things that happen. So that's less of a consideration for me there, but it's really important when I'm with the president, just trying to, even on the airplane with the goggles on Air Force One, when he comes back to the press cabin to talk, it's a matter of making sure that I'm not standing behind the tall reporter. I need to try to get in front of the tall guy so that the president can see me, I can make eye contact with him and try to get his attention.
I can just jump in briefly and say, it's the planning, like John said. If you want to know what's happening at the White House or anywhere, really ask a photographer. They are the best planned people you will find. And then also just being curious about things. Yes, you're looking at, if you're covering the president, the White House, you're covering the president, but you're also, who else is there and what does that lead you? Why is that person on the plane that day or in the meeting that day or not in the meeting that day? So you can spot those patterns that ultimately lead to stories down the line. So it's, they're sort of, keeping your head on the swivel so that you're not just, locked in on the one subject. It is having the general situational awareness is really helpful.
Definitely, for all of us. I can't believe this has already flown through, but we have time for one more question, and I want to make sure to hit all three of you with this. I guess we can start with Darlene, then Zeke, then John. What's the value in covering a beat for a long time, especially something as complex and high stress as US politics? What are things that you think make you better now than you were when you first started this? But all of that experience, what do you think it actually is translated into for you in staying on this beat or similar beats?
Sure. Certainly, you can bring the experience that you've gained over the years on a beat to your reporting, also to your writing. It can help you write more authoritatively because you've been there for a number of years. You've seen several things happen year after year after year. You can bring context to the reporting because you've been there, you've been through it. And knowing the players, I think, also helps a little bit. That's what I would say, and give some time to Zeke and John to answer too.
I can go next. Certainly everything Darlene said there. The other is sort of, particularly when you're covering the White House, it changes every 4 or 8 years as a different administration moves in. But there are some static rhythms to the place. When there's something big happening, you see, a bunch of black Suburbans pull up in the driveway, and you're like, "What's going on there?" And when it's a Saturday afternoon, it's an indication that that's unusual. Something else might happening. That's something I didn't know when I started on the beat. It took me years to develop. When the right sequence of meetings happen, or you see people move around in different ways, you get a sense of what an inkling of some threads to pull for stories. That's helped us stay ahead on some things over the years. And then also just developing those sources and those relationships and that trust with the subjects of our stories, and the people who work for them, and the people who work around them over years. It's really additive. They're great young reporters who are new to the beat, who do some really great work, and I can promise you that and after 10 years of doing it, they'll be even better at doing it. That there's a certain amount of the longer you spend reporting and developing that expertise, that subject matter expertise, the sourcing, the better people get. And it's undeniably true, and it's something that I've benefited from.
John, you get the final word.
All right. I think if we talk about inside the gates of the White House, the value of our photographers is that they've been into these rooms, they've been into the Oval Office, they've been into the East Room, they've done events in these rooms hundreds of times. And so when something happens that it's a little out of the ordinary, they're very tuned in to that. I think about in the Biden administration and now in the Trump administration, we look for notes that gets passed, handwritten notes. I think about last fall when they were doing a CEO event in the East Room, and Marco Rubio walks in, the Secretary of State, and obviously agitated. And so Evan Vucci immediately, okay, something's going on here. He sits down, writes this note, and for a split second, that note is up, and Evan got the note about let's finish up. We need to announce the Mideast peace deal. He goes over, whispers to the president, and we go, and there we go. The pictures are out, and it's in real time. We're communicating with the text desk about what we saw on that note, or showing that close up of that note. Outside of the White House gates, I think again, I think about the East Wing and the new construction. Just knowing Washington, knowing the vantage points where you can get to see that the demolition of the White House. I think Jacqueline Martin, who was on the forum yesterday, talked about that. But also knowing that you can get up into the Washington Monument at the right time and see the construction, because we're not seeing the construction from the ground level. It's fenced off. We don't have that access.
That is a powerful note on which to end. Thank you so much to Zeke, Darlene, and John for a wonderful close to what has been an extraordinary week. And to everyone who's joined us for one session or all 5 of them, thank you. Your support makes independent journalism possible. As an independent news organization with no corporate owner and no paywall, AP relies on readers like you. Please consider making a lasting donation at apnews.com/donate, or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Thank you for being part of AP's first